Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
And the topic of the conversation this evening will be a follow-up on the show that we did last Wednesday with Mitchell Gerber on the Falun Gong and the Oregon Harvest Station and the targeting of certain individuals there. And so this will be interesting as well, because this will connect to what we were talking about last week. And also know that I am slightly behind.
Hello?
Hey, Dr. Byrne, how are you this evening?
Good, Zen. How are you?
Really good. It's been a while, but I'm really honored to have you on with us again. I have as co-host with me this evening Laurel Austin. Laurel, this is Dr. Paul Byrne.
Hello, Dr. Byrne.
Hello, Laura. Glad to get to know you over the telephone.
Yes, we're glad you're here with us tonight.
Yeah, and so, Dr. Byrne, if you would, can you talk about the Life Guardian Foundation, the website, and also the work that you do, and the number of different topics and issues that you cover? We'll be speaking about a lot of that this evening, but if you would introduce yourself.
Sure. The Life Guardian Foundation is an organization that is set up to educate about life issues. And we protect and preserve life from true conception until true death. And so the organization takes a stand for life, against abortion, against infanticide. We are for life. We are against assisted suicide, whatever that happens to be, as they talk about it. Brain death is a mendacity. Mendacity is the best term that I know of to death is, to put it in words that might be used a little more commonly, although the word mendacity was used as early as 1350, so it's not a new word, but what it means is deception, a lie. Brain death is deception, and everyone who has that declaration of brain death put upon them is alive. And in fact, the matter is, in order to have the declaration of brain death put upon somebody, they must have a beating heart, circulation, and respiration, or they can't even do anything otherwise so far as the nervous system is concerned. So how did I get into doing what I do? I'm one of the founders of the field of neonatology. I started a special care nursery at Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital in 1963. And the reason I did it was that I reviewed the statistics at two hospitals in St. Louis, and there were no babies less than 1,500 grams who had trouble with breathing. It was 100% mortality. And I was a practicing pediatrician and did like all the other pediatricians did when we were called to see a prematurely born baby. go to see the baby, and if the baby had trouble with breathing, the baby would be dead in 24, at the most 48 hours. There was no treatment that was known. There was no treatment given to them. And just seemed to me that there should be something to do. So I did a number of things trying to get financial support to do this, and was unable to. Speaking of financial support, at that time, no insurance company paid for a sick baby. No insurance company paid for the hospitalization for a baby less than a few months old. The way the bill was paid for the baby when the baby was born in a hospital, whatever bill was there was attached to the mother's bill. So there was no way that insurance companies paid for the treatment and care of babies. In fact of the matter is, that even persisted until still was persisting in 1975. Remember, I started in '63, and there was no way to get those babies paid for. It was a major problem. But we did not focus on that. We focused on the fact that there should be some kind of treatment. And the only treatment that we had at that time was to give them glucose, sugar, in the vein, and then give them sodium bicarbonate, which would counteract their acidosis. And that's really all we had. And our nursery, when I started, I had one room that had 8 beds in it, and by the time I left that hospital about 20 years later, our unit was a 55-bed unit, and we were receiving babies from more than 50 hospitals. We were the first neonatal intensive care unit, certainly in St. Louis and really in the Midwest. And so we were instrumental in helping to find better ways to provide ventilation for the babies. That is, ventilators. They're commonly called respirators, but they really don't respirate anything. The ventilator is a piece of equipment that we use, and the ventilator basically pushes the air into the patient, but that's all it does. And everything then that happens because the patient is alive. The oxygen gets absorbed because the lungs are able to do that. The heart beats because the heart beats and circulation occurs because of that. And the oxygen is delivered to all the tissues of the body. And of course, carbon dioxide is formed. And then the circulatory system picks up carbon dioxide, takes it back to the lungs, and the carbon dioxide is exhaled. And the way that exhaling happens when a patient is on a ventilator is that the ventilator pushes the air in, and then the lungs and the muscles for breathing store the energy. And it's that stored energy that causes the elastic contraction that pushes the air out. You can understand about elasticity and stored energy if you just consider a rubber band. A rubber band lays on the table, doesn't do anything. You pick it up and it still won't do anything until you stretch it. And when you stretch it, what the rubber does, the way God made rubber, is that it has the capability of storing energy. So then when you let the rubber band go, then it contracts. And what makes it contract and who gave it the energy to contract you did when you stretched the rubber band, and then the rubber has the ability to store energy, so it can then contract. That's the way breathing happens with the ventilator. The ventilator pushes the air in. The exhaling is because the living, healthy lungs, chest wall pushes the air out. In fact, the matter is, it's how you and I breathe also. That our muscles of our diaphragm and chest wall contract, and that makes the chest get bigger, and air goes in. That's what happens when we take a breath in. Well, how do we breathe out? Well, the lungs and the chest walls store energy, and then they passively push the air out. So in any event, we had to work on finding ways to breathe better for babies, and we did that. And I can almost take you through them step by step in terms of each facet of the ventilator as it was discovered and got to where the ventilator for the little baby had to be so precise and so gentle that ventilator that was invented for the baby is the same ventilator that's used to breathe for everybody who's on a ventilator. Every ventilator is modeled after the ventilator for the baby. In fact, the matter is, it's the same ventilator. It's just that the volumes and the rates and the other things are adjusted differently for a baby and for an adult. So we then also had to find a way to provide nutrition for these little babies who were sick, and there really wasn't any way. So we were the first ones to invent peripheral nutrition in the vein. It was really an exciting time as I look back on it, because when we first started, you remember I told you about the glucose and the bicarbonate, but the only thing we could give was the glucose, and then later on the protein was added. And the way the protein was made was that seaweed was used, and seaweed was boiled, and then out of that the amino acids were extracted. And so every dose of protein that we would get, it would be different because it would depend on a lot of different factors. It was only later on that we could get specific at identifying which amino acids. And then we were the ones that identified the need for magnesium in the vein, the need for zinc in the vein, the need for copper in the vein. And so I was the director of a neonatal intensive care unit at Cardinal Glennon Hospital, and we were aggressive, is what I would say, and we were leaders certainly in the Midwest, in the country, at the things that we were doing. We also invented how to do blood pressure on premature babies. I needed to do this, and we had McDonnell Douglas that was a leader in the space program, and so I wrote a letter to Mr. McDonnell, and I said, "Dear Mr. McDonnell, you put people in space, you monitor their blood pressure and other things. I am here in St. Louis. I don't have any way to do blood pressure on premature babies. Can you help me?" And he sent 2 electronic engineers, and they came with their oscilloscopes, and I had my stethoscope, and we embarked on inventing the way to take blood pressure on premature babies.
Wow.
We took the blood pressure cuff from the astronaut's finger, moved it up to the arm of the little baby, and invented how to take blood pressure on the little baby. And that cuff that came off the astronaut's finger is very similar to the plastic cuff that's used to take blood pressure on all infants and children, really throughout the world, and so it came from that. And I know I'm talking a long time to bring you up to where I'm going to bring you up to, and what then happened. Well, in 1975, I had a baby who was born very prematurely, and was on a ventilator, trouble with breathing, and after several weeks was still on the ventilator. And when we would stimulate him, he wouldn't move, he wouldn't breathe, and so we did a brainwave test on him, and his brainwaves were flat, and what's written on his chart is consistent with cerebral death. And so I saw that on his chart as I read the report, and I looked at Joseph and I said, I don't understand this. So I called the neurologist, and he said, well, just get another one. And so we did in 2 days, and it was still flat. So I called him back and I said, what do we do now? He said, well, some places they turn off the ventilator. And I said, well, I don't do that. I said, I treat little babies, some live, some die, but I just treat them. So I continued to treat Joseph. Joseph did get off the ventilator. Joseph did go to school. He had excellent grades. He ran track. He played baseball. He's married, has 3 children. And so what that did is it stimulated my interest in this thing called brain death. Remember, it was 1975, and brain death was invented in 1968. So it was already in place 7 years before I got involved with it. And I was a professor of pediatrics in an academic environment, and so I then obtained articles in the literature to look at it, and it became clear to me that brain death was not based on any kind of data that would be acceptable as scientific data for anything else in medicine. There is no way, because there is no science behind brain death. They just made it up, and it was very difficult for me to accept and to realize how they did it, because I was so tuned in to making sure that as we progressed in the development of things for infants, that we approached it from an acceptable scientific point of view, even if somebody is not a scientist, they could readily understand that if you published the first article in 1968 and looked for references, you might expect this was a new way to declare somebody dead. So you might expect some references where they did some experiments on dogs or cats or rats or something, or at least they looked at a group of patients, whatever that is. Well, there were no basic science studies, and they had no patient studies. They just invented it. A committee at Harvard invented brain death, and it goes on from there. The next article in 1971 was known as the Minnesota criteria, and it was a study that says 25 patients, but when you read it, you find out they did EEG on only 9 of them, and 2 of the 9 had electrical activity, and they concluded that no longer was it necessary to do recordings of brain waves when you declare somebody dead. And it goes on from there that there is no science behind brain death. It was something that was made up to get organs. And really, it's the
Quick question
root.
for you, Dr. Byrne. Real quick question. So already back then, when the whole concept of brain death came into play, it was done in order to procure organs, and so the whole organ harvestation network was already in place back then. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact of the matter is that what they did, the first heart transplant was done in 1967, December the 1st, I believe. It was right early in December 1967. They did the first, in fact, it's December the 3rd now that I think about it, December the 3rd, 1967. And South Africa, Dr. Christian Bernard did the first heart transplant. And there is no way to do a heart transplant then or now unless it's essentially a beating heart at the time that they take it out. That is, they stop the beating heart as they cut it out. And Christian Bernard was, I would say, careful, cautious, but in any event, the patient had to be alive when the heart was taken, and then 3 days later, the second heart transplant was done, and it was done in Brooklyn, New York, and had a problem with his brain, and it was determined that he was not entitled to his heart, as well as another baby who had trouble with the heart. And so 3 days later, they cut the beating heart out of a 3-day-old baby in Brooklyn, New York, and transplanted it into an 18-day-old baby. And at the end of their operations, both babies were dead. They killed 2 babies. It was illegal. It was immoral. And that was in December of 1967. So a committee was appointed at Harvard to find a way to get hearts for transplant, and the Harvard committee invented the Harvard criteria, and it's considered to be a relatively strict set of criteria, because the patient had to be in that situation for at least 24 hours. Sometimes they would even say 48 hours. And of course, they continue to shorten the time down to 12 hours, 6 hours, 3 hours, 1 hour. And there's one set of criteria in the literature that when they take them off the ventilator in 30 to 60 seconds, if they see no evidence of breathing, that is the signal to cut out the beating heart and the other organs. And so, yes, Zen, it was the desire to get organs for transplantation that brain death was invented, and it's still the major reason that brain death is there. But they keep finding ways to get organs from people, even when they have a functioning brain, and so, but the root is the lie of brain death, but that lie of brain death was told, invented, whatever words want to be applied there, in order to get organs. So organ transplantation is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's essentially run by the federal government, but there was $24 billion billed in 2014 for organ transplantation.
Wow!
And of course, it's important to know how big the business is, but you have to know that there are no organs you can get from a cadaver.
Right.
There are no organs you can get from a cadaver. Every organ that's transplanted comes from a person who has a beating heart, circulation, and respiration, and you don't have to be a genius or be able to think too much to be able to realize that there's a marked difference between a cadaver and somebody that has a label put on them to get their organs. The cadaver is cold, blue, pale, doesn't have a beating heart, doesn't have circulation, there's no respiration, and everybody knows what a cadaver is, a corpse is, from going to a funeral, a wake, or they know because a relative of theirs has died, or they also know from their experiences with their pet dog, cat, or their bird, whatever it is. There's a clear difference, and once the living, whatever it is dead, and then it's the remains of someone. Well, you can take anybody with any kind of sense about them and go into an intensive care unit, and the patient is on a ventilator. They're warm. Their body isn't cold like a cadaver. They have beating heart. The beating of the heart, incidentally, is the nervous system that makes the heart beat is intrinsic to the heart. It has its own nervous system, its own set of nerves that makes the heart beat. It's a set of nerves also that makes it stop beating, because if it just beat and didn't turn off, it would just be a contraction and wouldn't do anything. So the nerves in the heart turn it off, and those nerves are in the heart. The brain doesn't do anything to those nerves. The heart beats without any input from the brain, as is readily apparent to everybody if they realize that when they do a heart transplant, they cut out all the nervous connections.
Hold on, Dr. Byrne. Hold on.
Yes.
We'll be right back, everyone. We're at first break. Welcome back, everybody. There's an interesting comment from Lady Horse in the chat room. She had said that she can't be an organ donor because of her having had and gone through chemotherapy. And so, Dr. Byrne, I wanted to ask you about that, if you knew about that and why that is. Is it because the chemotherapy is so powerful that they don't want to transplant with that having been affected, as far as affecting somebody else?
Well, yes, chemotherapy is a way that, for the most part, and you can't put all chemotherapy together, but many times it alters the immune system, and so that would get involved with not being an organ donor. But that lady has one of the things that happens that actually can be protecting her life.
Yes.
Because she's not a candidate to give organs, and so nobody's going to be cutting her open to get her beating heart out. And as all the rest of us, unless we have a document of refusal, all the rest of us, our lives are in jeopardy, and especially the young people, the people that are between 16 and 30, and you might extend that up to 40 now, because it used to be 30, but they go up to 40, and if they become unconscious and they're on a ventilator, as soon as they get into the medical system, organ procurement organization is notified. And the reason that happens is because the HIPAA law, which many people are familiar with, you go to your doctor, then you have to sign a document for the HIPAA law that has to do with theoretically protecting your records. You go to the pharmacy, you have to sign something. You go to the attorney, you have to sign something. You go to the insurance person, you have to sign something. And all of that has to do with the HIPAA law. But what's written into the HIPAA law is 14 ways that the government can get your information without your permission. And one of them is to get your organs. the laws are all set up to get your organs. The Determination of Death Act, so far as you're using brain death as a signal to get the organs, all of those people have a beating heart, circulation, and respiration. None of them are truly dead, and then the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, which has already been passed in 47 states, makes it so that it presumes that everyone intends to be an organ donor. And it's presumed that everyone has consented to everything being done to them to keep their organs in good shape, and also to do every test on them to determine if their organs are suitable for someone else. The laws are all set up to do this really without your permission. Ultimately, before they can take your organs, they have to get permission from somebody, and there's a descending class of persons: the mother, father, son, daughter, brother, sister, close relatives. But then it gets down to any friend can give your organs away. A grandchild can give your organs away, can give that final permission. And of course, the hospital administrator can do it, and so can the coroner do it. And then one of the things that there are a number of things that we need to talk about that are so very important, but one of the most important things that your listeners need to learn is that when the child reaches the age of majority, which in most states is 18, at that point, if they're unconscious, they do not look to the mother or father for any kind of consent to do any kind of procedure, sometimes the courts get involved, and when the courts get involved, they appoint a guardian or someone like that, and that's usually another attorney, so that every young person and every parent of a young person must learn now that they must have a power of attorney. And the youngster who is 18, assuming that they're not married, going to college, whatever that is, they need a document that says that their mother or their father is the person to speak for them. The legal system, I helped with a 2-year-old child in Virginia, a 2-year-old child, Miranda, who choked on popcorn, and it was so awful. And then in the courtroom, the court appointed another attorney to be the guardian for that child. The child had a mother who loved her, a father who loved her, had 5 brothers and sisters who loved her. Some of them were 20 and 19. They had reached the age of majority, and the court could have appointed any one of them, but the court appoints another attorney. So, and I'm not an attorney. I am a doctor, not an attorney. But the people must learn that the 18-year-old must have a power of attorney, and the power of attorney that they need to have is one that will protect and preserve their life. And we do send out booklets that have examples of power of attorney that will do this. We also send out cards. Life Guardian Foundation send out cards for people to carry with them. And those cards protect and preserve your life, and says that you do not want to be an organ donor. You don't want anybody to shorten your life. And those cards can be signed and witnessed, and you can also designate someone to speak for you if you can't speak for yourself. So there are ways that you can still do things to protect and preserve your life in the United States, but they continue to find ways to make it so that you can't. We helped with Aiden Halou in Nevada, And Aiden Alou was a 20-year-old girl who was in college and got bellyache and got into the system, and the system operated on her, and then she didn't wake up after the operation. And her father was an astute, alert person, and as soon as he got involved, he went to court to get guardianship for her. And that did protect and preserve her life for a number of months. And we did go to the Supreme Court in Nevada, and the Supreme Court basically ruled then to send it back to the lower court because of, and that occurred because of the input that we were able to have. But then what's happened is that the legislature in Nevada has now passed a law to make it that if the relatives do not accept this thing called brain death, then the law says that they may be responsible for all the expenses that are incurred as a result of their objecting. And my experience in life is that when you do that to someone, they say, I can't do this. You know, I don't have enough money to stand up against the system. So
Right.
they made it so that you can't do that. And then another thing that your listeners must learn is that in this declaration of brain death, there is a procedure called an apnea test, and it's really a procedure. It's a procedure where they take the patient off the ventilator for 10 minutes. They suffocate them for 10 minutes, and they even if they give them oxygen, they're not able to get any carbon dioxide out, and that increase in carbon dioxide and the acidosis that's with it makes the brain swelling get worse, and actually they die during this test sometimes.
Oh
It
my
makes them
gosh.
die. And the law in Nevada now says that no information is needed to be given to the relatives before that test is done. They can just do it. And see, and these come about because of the arguments that presented at the court. So, and the Supreme Court in Nevada unanimously agreed with some of the things that we were saying and sent it back to the lower court. And then Aiden Halou did die before it could be heard again in court. And so then the legislature gets involved and makes it so the things that we brought up can never be brought up again. And in Nevada at least. And I would predict that every state is going to get a law like that. And the only way to stop these things is that ordinary folks, that's you, Zen, that's me, and the listeners must get involved, must learn what these things are about, learn that brain death is not true death. It's a deception. It's a lie that's out there to get organs. And then the organ transplant industry gets organs not only from brain death, which is one of the major ways, but the newest thing is to get organs from the people who overdose.
Oh,
They
wow.
get more organs from people who overdose than they do from the head injuries, from accidents, and from gunshot wounds combined. And it's so terrible. You know, that the people that got addicted, it's such a serious matter for them, for their families. And now if they overdose, they become a candidate to get their organs. And there are 8 deaths a day in Ohio from overdose of drugs. And this is a major source of getting organs. And so and of course, then along with this brain death, then they invented heart death. And
Right.
Heart death is somebody who has a functioning brain, but they want to get their organs. And so then what they do is they find a way to take away their life-supporting ventilator, and then they don't wait until the heart stops beating. They wait until the heart is not beating strong enough to cause a pulse. And when there's no pulse for 5 minutes, that's the signal to cut out their beating heart and other organs. These things are going on. The general public is, they hear it on this program. But if you weren't doing this and I wasn't doing this, the large majority of the listeners would have no idea. The large majority of the doctors have no idea about what's happening. The lawyers have no idea. I'm not sure that the legislators have much of an idea, but they do pass laws to make these things. The Anatomical Gift Act is a terrible law. It's already passed in 47 states. I went to the legislature to testify in opposition to it, and then when they had the hearings again, I showed up again, and they said, Dr. Byrne, we usually don't allow anyone to testify more than once. And that didn't make any sense to me. And then they said, well, since you're a doctor, we'll let you testify again. And that's absolutely awful. There's no reason why you can't go back more than once. And why should a doctor get special treatment? Yes, doctors are educated, but when we go there to testify as a citizen, I think citizens should have equal opportunity. And if they see a reason to come back twice, why not listen to them? Mm-hmm. Well, just to put that in perspective, I try to help them to understand that the Anatomical Gift Act that presumes that everyone is an organ donor is a form of slavery. And because slavery isn't always chains and shackles, sometimes it's not allowing you to have any information, and that makes you a slave. Because if you get information, you're going to behave differently. So they keep you from getting information. The only information that you get, that the general public gets about organ transplantation, is at the License Bureau. They're asked if they want to be an organ donor. They get the driver's education courses all tell them all the good things about organ transplantation. And then you see on the billboard, give the gift of life. Well, let me tell you, folks, it is the gift of life in the sense that the heart, when it's dead in a cadaver, is no good for transplant. It's the heart with life that they want for transplant. That with life, the beating heart is what they want for transplant. They don't want the heart that's without life. And so when they say give the gift of life, my first inclination is to say no. You can't get the gift of life that way. The gift of life comes only from the Creator, and so when they say give the gift of life, as I think about it more and more, it is the heart with life that's transplanted. It is the liver with life that's transplanted. It is the kidney with life that's transplanted. Because if it's just a kidney, then it isn't any good for transplantation. It must be a kidney with life. It must be a liver with life. It must be a heart with life. And so these things are going on. Your listeners need to remember when they reach the age of majority, they must have a power of attorney that designates their mother or their father. Everybody must remember no to that procedure for the apnea test. It won't do you any good in Nevada because they already have the worst law in the whole country in Nevada. But it will still work in your state to say no to the apnea test. They will still do it, and a lot of times they do it without the relatives ever getting information. But you have to know no to the apnea test, and then you have to know that when you go to the hospital, they ask you, do you have a living will? And I think that it's probably better to say no, you don't have one.
Right.
even if you have one. Because if you have one, all living wills are set up to protect doctors and hospitals
Yes.
against liability, and no one should have a living will. But you should have a power of attorney, but still, if you say no, and then somebody has to find it at home, that will at least delay. And what should you do when you go in the hospital? You should make it very clear. I'm here to get treated. I want to be treated. That's what I want. I want to be diagnosed and treated. We have a system that when somebody gets very sick, what they do is they put them in hospice, or even if they're not very sick, they put them in palliative care. And palliative care is the way that Obamacare and Medicare is being practiced. Palliative care means no curative treatment, and then treatment that's less and less, and eventually it's treatment that is given to take care of suffering and pain and the like, which is to make you die sooner. And so and all of these things, and all of them are interrelated. The issues are the same for
Right.
all of the issues. And
Dr. Byrne,
well, anyway,
let me
I talk a lot, so
yeah.
so I'm happy if you're going to ask questions, and
Yeah,
your associate there can ask questions, and so can the people call in. I'm happy to try to answer. So go ahead.
well, we appreciate you. You're very knowledgeable. You're very thorough. In fact, a lot of the things that Laurel was going to bring up, you have already touched upon, and so we greatly appreciate you. But I did want to ask you, and I wanted to also comment, and we'll give Laurel a chance to hit you up with comment when we get back from break. But a lot of people don't realize either that the living will, which is the advanced directive that most people choose to get and to have, but it, as you said, it does nothing to protect your life, and in fact, it reduces the emergency care that you will get and receive. And most people don't realize either that the living will was set up by the euthanasia and the right to die groups, and they did it as a way um, to get rid of the elderly, people with disabilities, and to make sure that people do not get good emergency care. And as you brought forth, it protects the hospitals, it protects the doctors, and it keeps them from being sued for denying you emergency care. And so, most certainly, you do not want to have a living will. It's better to not have any advance directive than to have a living will. But if you would get a durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions or something of that nature, which keeps you from being starved or dehydrated, ensures that they don't target you for your organs, and that they cannot deny you ventilator or feeding tube, which are just basic measures when you are in need of those kind of procedures to prolong your life. But can you talk about that as well, Dr. Byrne, as far as the difference, real quick? We got just a few minutes, and then when we return from break, I'll get Laurel a chance to comment here.
Yes, the first thing about living wills, it's similar to life insurance. That is, life insurance has nothing to do with life, only to do with death. And of course, the life insurance salesman could not sell death insurance, so he sells life insurance. Has nothing to do with life. Living wills are similar. Living wills have nothing to do with living. They all make you die sooner. And they
Hold on, Dr. Byrne. Sorry,
okay.
We're already at break. We'll pick it up on the other side. We'll be right back, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. I have as co host with me this evening Laurel Austin and as special guest Dr. Paul Byrne of the Life Guardian Foundation.org. Dr. Byrne, if you would, I want to give you a chance to finish up your comment, and then Laurel would like to ask you something as well.
Sure. Okay, to finish up the comment, the first thing about the living will, there's nothing living about it, and I would say no one should have a living will. What it amounts to is protection for the doctor and the hospital, so that if someone dies, then the relative cannot bring up anything legally about what that was all about, because the person has already documented that under certain conditions they would prefer not to get treatment, and of course if they've accepted that, then they've already accepted the principle that they would rather be dead than get treatment, and so the doctors in the hospitals all have a ready defense. Now, the next thing that I have to know about a living will, if someone does any kind of an advance directive, and this, what I'm saying, will apply to any kind of advance directive, and there's basically two kinds. One is the living will, and the other is the power of attorneys, and that you already mentioned and are supporting. Well, both of them can make decisions about something that's going to happen 5 years from now, when in fact the way that a doctor practices medicine is he gets all of the current information before he makes a decision or gives advice to someone. And it's impossible to have current information about what's going to happen 5 years from now. Furthermore, the doctor, and in the modern times of internet, it isn't just the doctor, but everyone has up-to-date information so far as treatment is concerned. And there is no way that you can have up-to-date information about what the future of medicine is. And so no one should have a living will, because these principles are violated with living wills. And then the power of attorney should be there for someone who is alert, awake, and conscious, as opposed to the person who is unconscious. But that someone who's alert and awake should be able to protect and preserve your life. And that's what the power of attorney should say. The power of attorney should not say, well, under certain circumstances, you shouldn't get antibiotics. Come on, folks, you can't make those decisions now. Under certain circumstances, you shouldn't get food and water. You can't decide that. You know, I grew up and had information that came from people who were in concentration camps and had to go without food and water. And years later, they were still always carrying some kind of food with them because starvation was so awful. And the starvation is awful for everyone. And the case that got a lot of notoriety was the Terry Schiavo case. And that was a case of dehydration and starvation. And Terry Schiavo died within 13 days after they took away her food and water. And everyone without water is dead in 1 to 2 weeks. And it took 13 days for her because she was not very active. You and I that are up and about and active, if we would suddenly be without water in just a few days, we would be dead, certainly within a week. And so you should have a power of attorney. The power of attorney that we recommend you can obtain from Life Guardian Foundation. and then if you contact us, we will send out a booklet that has information about brain death organ transplants, and also has a model for power of attorney that you can take to your attorney, because we are not attorneys. I am a physician, but we give out a model, because a model that will only protect and preserve your life is what was necessary. So many of the power of attorneys have ways under certain circumstances you don't get treated. That isn't what you should want. You should want to get treated. And don't worry, you will not get too much treatment. It will not happen. And because there's so many things that are in the works to make you get less treatment, so don't worry, you won't get too much treatment, and just get a document that will protect and preserve your life, and then get our some people call them opt-out cards that we have, and it basically says that you want to be treated and you don't want anybody to take your organs. And we have cards that you can sign and witness and carry them with you. We also provide them in the booklet so that you can get them notarized. All right, now I keep talking, and I know you have your associate there, Laura.
Yes.
That must be thinking, won't this guy ever quiet down long enough for me to ask a question? So go ahead, Laura.
That's okay. So I want to go back to the DMV, because seeing as how they're not really giving any information or details when they ask you, do you want to be an organ donor? And I looked on my driver's license and I see the little heart there and that I'm an organ donor. My plan is to go up and have that revoked, and I will do that. But I've heard that that doesn't even always really solve your problem. So I went to your website and I downloaded the instructions to complete for protect and preserve life. I've got those cards here. And I think it's also so important that you tell as many family and friends as possible that you do not want to be an organ donor. But this is kind of my question, because sometimes some of these people that end up being organ harvested, it happens really fast. They're in a car wreck, they're taken to the emergency room, and I mean, what do they do? Do they look through your wallet to look at your license to see if you're an organ donor? And do they contact family first before they start like cutting into you if you're to the point where we've got to procure these organs now before this person dies? So what my question is kind of, what are the steps? Because a power of attorney, what if it's like the middle of the night on a weekend and, people can't be reached?
Yes, well, your questions are good and great and right on. The first thing is that the system is such that if you are a child or if you are under the age of 40 and you are unconscious, already the wheels are rolling to get your organs. Just already with the 911 call, it works like that, and we live in a United States where they have level 1, level 2, and level 3 trauma centers. The level 1 trauma center, which is where they're supposed to be able to get the treatment for most serious conditions, are also the organ transplant centers, and so it's set up to get you to the organ transplant center. And to go back to the accident, if someone is dead at the scene of the accident, no organs can be obtained. Nothing's going to happen to them. You cannot get organs from a cadaver. You must be alive. which organs do they want? They want the organs from young people because those organs are the most healthy. See, if you can get an organ from the 19-year-old and give it to somebody who's 50, then they're running around with a 19-year-old heart, liver, kidney, whatever it is, and they're 50 years old. Oh, wow, they're excited, and that's how the system works. Then how old can they take organs? Well, the oldest one that I've heard of was 91 years old, and they still used his kidneys. In the organ transplant industry, they have different classes of organs. Class A organs, that's the youngest and most healthy. And then Class B organs, sometimes they have something wrong with them, like some of the things can be somebody with HIV. But the HIV is under control. Well, and the chance of getting an organ is either from somebody with that, or or to stay on the transplant list. And part of how these things become aware, that we become aware of them and find out what they're doing, is somebody gets an organ and then they do get HIV. And so far as the recipients of organs, and that's what they advertise most. But I have an article here on my desk that says that 30 to 60% of recipients of organs have some kind of neurological dysfunction, and of course the recipients of organs have to take anti-rejection medication. And anti-rejection medication sets them up to get severe infections, to get cancers, those kinds of things. So they advertise and show you the picture of the recipient of the heart, or the kidney, or the liver, and show how they're doing very well. But they don't tell you all the stories about what's really going on. As one organ recipient relayed, was that it was an exchange of one set of problems for another set of problems, and that's in contrast to the way medicine used to be, and still is sometimes. But medicine is such that if somebody gets appendicitis, then they get an operation and they're cured. That's not what happens in organ transplantation. Our bodies are made not to allow transplantation of any organ from one person to another, and so nature does that. Now, the recipients of organs and the doctors who treat them must have anti-rejection drugs that they take essentially for the rest of their life, and that's to reduce their immune system. Now, everyone has a very active immune system, so you can't transplant organs from one to another, but the Creator knows how to interfere with the immune system, and he does it. Every time that a woman is pregnant, her immune system is interfered with, so that foreigner, that one that's foreign to her immune system, does not get rejected. So the Creator builds in a way to interfere with the immune system, and that can be demonstrated. There's an early pregnancy factor that can be demonstrated, and it's present already when there's the baby is just two cells that it's already there interfering with the mother's immune system. And so, but in the rest of us who are not pregnant, there is no way to receive an organ from another person unless the anti-rejection medications are given. Now, getting back to your own self and your license, yes, you do need to go back to the License Bureau. What you can do, like right now, even before you get to the License Bureau, you can get an indelible marker, and put an X over that heart. That would be one thing you can do. And then on the other side of your license, you can write no to the organ donation or no to the taking of organs. You can do that. Then you do have to go back to the License Bureau and to present to them, and that's called a revocation. But that Anatomical Gift Act that's already been passed in 47 states says that a revocation is not a refusal, and they can still get your organs, and they will, if especially if you are less than 40 years of age. They will do everything and anything they can, because the organs from somebody who's 30 years old is worth between $1 and $5 million to the organ transplant industry. So they will do everything to get your organs. And so the listeners must learn that a revocation is not a refusal, and it's spelled out exactly like that in the law, that a revocation is not a refusal. So you still must have a document of refusal, and our opt-out cards that we send out, and all you have to do is contact us, and we send them out, and you, though, when you get them, you must sign them and have them witnessed, and you must carry them with you. I cover them with, laminate them, so that they cannot be interfered with, and it protects them and makes them last longer. Anyway, okay, Laura, and then you also, with the License Bureau, it's important to realize that they actually pay the ones who teach driver's ed to be supportive of organ transplantation. And the people in driver's ed are not allowed to say these things that we're saying about organ transplantation. And we know that because sometimes the person in driver's ed will tell the youngsters about the things that we're talking about, and then they get reprimanded and put on the carpet and not allowed to teach until they agree that they won't be saying those things anymore. And so anyway, yes, we have to learn as much as we can. We have to stand for life in these matters. But your listeners must do this. They must get those opt-out cards. They must sign them. They must get power of attorney. They must do this. And yes, it will still work in all of the states to protect your life, except Nevada. God help the people in Nevada, but they're going to make that law in all the rest of the states too.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
Does your power of attorney have to be in your same city or state?
Well, those are all legal questions, and my experience with the law is that yes, statutes mean something, but the best thing to do is to have a good lawyer, and then realize the good lawyer has to present his case in front of a judge and then get a ruling from the judge. And so what can you do? You already mentioned, tell your friends and your relatives that you don't want to be an organ donor and that you want to be treated. That's the most important thing. Get these things lined up, and then hope and pray that you don't have any accidents and that kind of thing, that it doesn't come there, because I mean, it's so awful, and I get called to help people, and recently I was at the bedside of a lady. I went because her 3 daughters said to ask me to go, and this lady, they had decided that she was not going to get any more treatment. She had a hemoglobin of 5. Normal is maybe 14. And she had a hemoglobin of 5, and they would not give her a blood transfusion. It was so awful.
Oh my
No
gosh,
blood
that's terrible.
transfusion. And so we kept on, and it was on Friday they were going to stop treating her, and we kept on objecting and wanting blood transfusion. So what they did then is they did give her one blood transfusion on Saturday morning, but they would not do another blood count, and they would not do any more. And on Sunday afternoon, at 3 o'clock, they were going to take away her ventilator. And I was out of town. I was in Minneapolis. This lady was in Pennsylvania. I went on the plane, got the car, drove as fast as I was legal to go. I got there at 5 minutes to 3, and at 3 o'clock, the doctor came in and pulled out the ventilator tube, pulled out the endotracheal tube and the feeding tube.
Oh my
and
gosh.
then the lady continued to breathe and was breathing fast, and the doctor ordered a dose of morphine to make her breathing slow down. I said, "Doctor, that would be the dumbest thing you could do." He didn't give the morphine. The lady did not die that day, but the lady did die, but she never got another blood count. She never got another blood transfusion.
Yeah.
And see what, and I keep learning about these things. And what I learned in that case was that they have these policies in hospitals not to treat. And then another one besides hospice and palliative care. And incidentally, we could not get this, even though we didn't want hospice. That was the only thing that they would cooperate with us. Two hospice. One hospice wouldn't take her because she had a feeding tube, and the other hospice wouldn't take her because she had a BiPAP machine and to help her to breathe. And so the hospitals and the system of death that exists in the United States has, when you get very sick, and even if you're not very sick, sometimes it gets into hospice and palliative care. And then the one that I learned from this patient was that they pull the fetal care policy. And the fetal care policy is really done by the hospital administrator, not by the doctors, but the hospital administrator says that it's futile to continue to treat somebody. And then along these lines, with two other patients that I'm working with, I've learned about the two-doctor DNR, the two-doctor do not resuscitate. And what in the world is that? Well, that's when the patient won't give a do not resuscitate, or with the relatives, the power of attorney will not give a do not resuscitate. Then two doctors have then say it's futile and put a do not resuscitate on the patient. And of course, do not resuscitate has all kinds of things that go along with it. It's a kind of broad order that no doctor should write, no nurse should accept it. Sometimes you might say, well, that means no CPR. Well, CPR is all kinds of different things. That's the first thing. But what happens is once you have that on your chart, that you don't want to be resuscitated, then there's a whole lot of other things that happen. I'm in hospitals, and what happens? Then the alarm goes off because the IV is occluded or something like that. And what happens? Nobody comes very quickly. It takes a long time, a longer time, because they're already do not resuscitate. What difference does it make? And so no one should have a do not resuscitate order. And incidentally, these kinds of things and what people need to know to help to themselves to get educated what to do. We have a booklet that's called Life Support in Death, and it's available at American Life League. You can call American Life League, and they ask for a $3 donation. You should probably get about 10 of them when you do it. One for yourself and one for your friends and relatives. But it's called Life Support in Death. And it's co-authored with 9 other physicians and a member of the clergy and an attorney who helped us to write it. But it gives the directions and guidance as to what to do to protect and preserve your life. So I encourage people to do that too. American Life League is the name of it, and the name of the document is Life Support in Death. So your listeners should get that. If you don't have one, Zen, you should get it too, and so should you, Laura.
Yes, most certainly. And I would also say that if you have a regular hospital that you frequent whenever you're ill, or that you can go ahead and submit an advance directive so that it is there on file. And that's one way to, not have to go through the headache of if something occurs to you and you have to deal with emergency care, that it's already there on the books. We'll be right back for final segment. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. And I posted a comment in the chat room about how I know that this is a topic which few people seem to be interested in, but in my opinion, it is one of those critical issues, and we don't realize to what degree the hospital medical establishment will go through in order to gain access to our loved ones or our own organs, and that the for-profit healthcare institution, they make more money off of delving out your organs than they do in saving your life. And that those of you that are organ donors, you're putting a big target on yourself without even realizing as to that's what's occurring. And so let me give Laurel a chance to comment here as well, and then we'll go back to Dr. Byrne.
Well, just that medical treatment can be stopped for someone caught between personhood and death. It's just plain God. And thank goodness for shows like this and for Dr. Byrne out there educating people to preserve their life and their organs. So thank you for coming on, Dr. Byrne. I really appreciate it. I know Zen does too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you would, again, Dr. Byrne, give out your website, and if there's a contact or something that you share where people can go to ask you questions or to contact you, or anything of that nature, if you would.
Sure. www.lifeguardianfoundation.org. Life Guardian Foundation are those three words all put together. .org. The other place you can read some of my writings about these subjects is renewamerica.com/columns/Byrne. And I'm a guest columnist there, and I have written a number of things about Charlie Gard, about Jahai McMath, Aidan Halou. These are all patients that I've participated in helping to treat them. And Jahai McMath is who was the 13-year-old girl in California in 2013 who had tonsil surgery, and post-op they said she was brain dead, and her mother got on the TV and said, "Would somebody please help?" So I got on the plane and went to California, and they would not allow any doctors from the outside to see her. And so the way I got in is that her stepfather was about equidistant. The guard was equidistant between him and me. And the stepfather said, "Oh, Pastor, come on in here." And that's how I got in to help to get the treatment started for Jahai. Jahai, it was necessary. The court ruled that they had to sign a death certificate, which they did. They signed the death certificate in California on December the 12th. And she was in the hospital in California with a death certificate for 3 weeks. And then we got her out of that hospital, had to get her out in the middle of the night and get her to New Jersey. There in New Jersey, she's had her 14th birthday or 15th birthday or 16th birthday. And recently, a judge has ruled that they can have hearings as to whether she's dead or alive. Come on,
Oh my
folks.
gosh.
What
insane.
kind of world do we live in? I mean, any one of the listeners or me or the judge could go to her home and see her, and if somebody's going to say she's a corpse, why, that is absolute sheer nonsense. Can you imagine somebody take care of a corpse for 3 years?
Right.
Come on.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous.
And yet the legal system, and then they won't hear the case till next year.
Oh
It'll
my
be
God.
another year till they hear the case. And so, and she's very much alive, and she's a beautiful girl. Her mother says, "Give me a thumbs up," and she does that. She says, "Raise your left leg," or raise your right leg, one or the other, and Jahai does that. And for someone to say that that's a cadaver, that is nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been nonsense since the very beginning. When I went out there to California to see her, it was so bad because they referred to her as a dead body. They wouldn't even call her by name.
Oh my
It
gosh.
was so terrible. And then the nurse at one point said, "Smell that? Smell that? She's dying on the inside." Oh my goodness
gosh.
sakes! It was nothing but that she passed gas, and then they were
Oh my
saying that she's dying on the inside. It was so awful it's so awful to go through these things and
To be treated like that.
Yeah, and to be treated can you imagine having a 13-year-old girl and being the mother, and the doctors and nurses referred to her as a dead body?
Oh,
That was 3 years ago. I mean, this stuff is so awful. And the people, yes, they do need to wake up. So far as the people being interested, we live in a world where everything goes fast. 24 hours is not any faster now than it was 1,000 years ago. But we do put so much more time into it. When I was a youngster, we would spend time going to visit Grandma and Grandpa. That's not very much of that done anymore because everybody's too busy with their volleyball or whatever else it happens to be. And I don't mean to pick on volleyball. I could name soccer, golf, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get up to go to church on Sunday morning. The other day, I was visiting my sister in Cincinnati, and I went past 5 couples who were out walking on Sunday morning. You know, that the walking, taking care of their body is more important than taking care of their soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so we live in a society where things move fast, but the truth doesn't change. The truth is the same now as it always was and always will be. And so what do doctors and nurses do? We protect and preserve life. That's all we do. And if ever a doctor or a nurse or a respiratory therapist is involved with doing anything other than protecting and preserving life, that's not medicine. Sometimes the respiratory therapist will say to me, "Well, Dr. Byrne, what am I supposed to do when the doctor orders to stop the ventilator? I say, well, if the doctor wants that done, he ought to do it himself.
Amen.
And I'm not advocating what the doctor wanted to do. That's not it. But I don't think it's proper for the doctor to dump on the respiratory therapist or the nurse to do what's evil.
Yes.
I think that they, if they're going to do it, they ought to do it themselves, or
Yes.
else they shouldn't write such orders. But anyway, there's a lot of things, and Laura, you got some more questions?
Oh, let's see. Well, I had written down, let's see. No, I don't think I do. You've covered everything.
You're very
Well,
thorough. I've got a question for you, Dr. Byrne.
Yes, Sam.
Would you mind sharing, because I get contacted by families that tell me of how the hospitals they practice deceptive procedures, like they will put their family members into a coma, or to keep them, mostly out of consciousness, in order to trick the families into donating their organs. They often say that, especially if it's a young person, there's nothing else that we can do. The best thing would be to just donate their organs, and allow them to live that way. And so, if you would, can you share some examples, some
Sure.
stories?
Sure. No, that's so. Now, we want to distinguish. See, there's new treatments that are helpful, and one of the treatments is hypothermia. So that when there is a question of swelling of the brain, we can cool the body, reduce the temperature, and that reduces the metabolism, and that helps until they can heal somewhat, and then their temperature can be brought up. Sometimes drugs will be used to do that too, but they are carefully monitored, and then it takes a while until those drugs are metabolized. And you're right, they do embark on saying that this was a terrible thing that's happened, and you can make something good out of this by giving your son or your daughter's organs. And besides that, if you don't give the organs, then your son, your daughter will be a vegetable or whatever that is. And incidentally, a human being is never a squash or a sweet potato. And so that's very degrading to do that, but to say those things. But those kind of things are said. And the other thing that I want to emphasize very much, because this is part of what I do. What I do is not only bring out the fallacy, the deception, the mendacity of brain death, but then new treatment. Hypothermia is a new treatment, and then another new treatment is thyroid medication. See, the brain has a pituitary gland that makes thyroid stimulating hormone. Well, when the brain swells, it stops making thyroid stimulating hormone, and then the patient is deficient in thyroid, and the deficiency of thyroid makes their brain swelling get worse. And the treatment is to give them thyroid medication. So all the doctors know that the thyroid medication can help, but I have situations where the only way the doctor will give the thyroid medication is if the relatives agree to be an organ donor, because they know the thyroid helps the organs to be more healthy for the one they're going to give the organs to, but it also helps the patient to live longer. And these patients that I've been telling you about have been treated with thyroid, and it does help them to live longer. Everybody needs thyroid. Almost everybody has a relative or a friend that's on thyroid. Thyroid is almost as important to your staying healthy as your beating heart and circulation is. It has to have thyroid, and it's so important. And the one with the swelling of the brain makes less thyroid stimulating hormone. They usually still make some, but not enough to keep their thyroid in good shape. So you have to give thyroid to them. So that's another thing that the relatives need to ask. And when I get involved, one of the things, a couple things I do. One is to ask them to get a test for thyroid, TSH and T4 and T3. Get a test for that, and then I alert them: no apnea test, no procedure of an apnea test, no. Everybody must no apnea test. That's the and Jahai McMath. They did it 3 times to her.
Oh
3 times
gosh.
they took away her ventilator for 10 minutes. They suffocated
Wow.
her 3 times. And then with Jahai, they gave her no nutrition for a month. It was so awful.
That's horrible.
Of course, it's horrible. And yes, Jahai and Jahai's mother and relatives, they're happy that Jahai is alive. But let me tell you, she would have been in a lot better shape if she'd have gotten some better treatment right from the very beginning.
Right.
And it was so shameful that we had to transfer her from California to New Jersey to get treated. I could not get a doctor or a hospital in this United States to take her. I did everything I could. She's not the only one. Israel Stinson was in California, a 1-year-old boy who had an asthma attack, and he needed treatment. We could not get a doctor or hospital in this United States to treat him. We had to transfer him to Guatemala to get a tracheostomy and a feeding tube. There in Guatemala, he got good treatment, and he was doing well. And then we couldn't get anybody to take him back to the United States. No doctor, no hospital would participate. And somehow or another, Los Angeles Children's Hospital said that they would take him, and we thought that they were going to treat him. Only to get him back there, they gave no more tests to him. They didn't do anything. They went to court, and they did a thing where they got the mother and the father away from Israel. They took away his life support and made him die.
Oh my
where
gosh.
he was thriving in Guatemala. I mean, these things are going on. Where in the world do I even tell these things unless I get a chance from your radio program? But when these things are going on, the general public ought to be hearing about them, ought to know about them.
Yes.
I had Dr. in Aidan Halou's case say, Dr. Byrne, I agree with you, but I can't do the tracheostomy because I can't stand the pressure from my peers. And so these things are going on, and yes, I do what I can, and I'm grateful to be on your program. I hope that the people who listen will realize that they must do something for themselves. They can still do it, although I saw on the news that they've introduced a one-payer system into the legislature in Washington. And the one-payer system will make it so that all of these rules will all be set up, and it won't do any good to do anything else about it, or even try to, because it will all be determined by who pays and how much they pay. And that's what happens when you get a one-payer system. I see it as not good for our society to have a one-payer system. Yes, everybody needs to have health care, but it should be such that there ought to be some competition to it, and that's our system that we've had. While it's pretty much the same for the rich and for the poor, assuming they get into the system. But when you have a one-payer system, it will be the same, and what will determine whether you get any treatment will be determined by how much the government will provide to pay the doctor in the hospital. And so the one-payer system is a terrible, terrible system. That's what they have in Canada. That's what they have in England. and you hear stories about long waits and the other things. And what it really amounts to is the government controls the health of the people. The health of the people should be controlled by each person themselves. When they get sick, they should be allowed to go to the doctor, and they ought to go to the doctor who cares about them, not the doctor who looks at the laptop computer filling in the X's and the things that he has to fill in. He ought to pay attention to you. I mean, I go to doctors and I watch what they do. They're more interested in a laptop computer than they are in me, and I pick out the best doctors. And so what's happening to the other people and the other doctors?
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible system. It's a sign of the times, in my opinion, Dr. Byrne, how just twisted and upside down everything is. You call good evil and evil good, and it's really sad that we are having to witness this and see this, and especially for individuals like yourself that really do care for your patients and are concerned for life and that want to stand up for it. And yet, the medical establishment, the industry itself, is set up to support those that are in opposition and to mandate policies which have nothing to do anymore with the Hippocratic Oath of taking care of life and being concerned for it. And so we really appreciate you, Dr. Byrne, and for all that you do. I'll most certainly be praying for you, and we will have you on further to talk about more of this. And we should also talk about doing a book together. And if that's something that you have time to do, we would certainly be interested in publishing something. To bring more attention to this. But if you would, Dr. Byrne, we have just a minute or so remaining. Give out all your website and contact information once more.
Yes, www.lifeguardianfoundation.org. And when you contact us, also ask for the opt-out card. And we have a way that you can download that and get that. And obviously, if anyone wishes to send a donation, we accept that. But we function in such a way that what we focus on is the truth, and that's what we've done since the beginning. And somehow or another, we've survived. But we need people to pay attention to what we say. Go to our website. You can see my presentations. Many of my presentations are on the website. It will take you a few minutes to listen to them, but you'll learn about the things that we've been talking about in this program. You can also go to renewamerica.com/columns/Byrne, and I'm a guest columnist there, and you can see some of my writings about the patients that we've talked about here tonight. Charlie Gard, Jahai McMath, Aidan Halou, Israel Stinson. I've written about all of them, and you can go there and find out information about them. Zen, thank you very much, and keep doing your good work. And Laura, and you said you would pray for me. I appreciate that tremendously. I will pray for you also. Many people pray for us, and it's what keeps us going. So we praise God and thank God for our blessings, and ask God to stay with us, that when we speak the truth, and when we hear, that the truth is heard. And so we have to keep on. You do what you do, I do what I do, and we need the people out there to do their part of it for themselves.
Amen. 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 Thank you, Dr. Byrne. Laura, would you like final comment?
Yeah, just everyone, if you have a family member that goes into the emergency room, you make sure those doctors give them enough time to heal.
Amen. Hey, thank you, Dr. Byrne. We'll be in touch real soon. I'll send you the archive link when it's released. Be blessed,
Thank you a lot. Bye.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.
Shalom.